The woman with the scarlet umbrella stood at the edge of the ancient plaza, her voice carrying across the cobblestones with a passion that made every word feel like a secret being shared. And Marcus Chen found himself forgetting entirely why he had come to this city in the first place. Rain misted down on the afternoon crowd, but she did not seem to notice or care. Her umbrella was more prop than protection, tilted back over one shoulder as she gestured toward the weathered fountain at the center of the square. Marcus had joined the tour group on a whim, ducking away from the relentless stream of business calls that had followed him across the Atlantic. He had expected the usual monotone recitation of dates and names, the kind of tour that made history feel like a chore. Instead, he got Eliza Moreau. "This fountain was built in 1643, she said, her dark eyes sweeping across the gathered tourists. But the water that flows through it today has a story that most people never hear. During the siege of 1709, when the city was starving and surrounded, a young woman named Catherine Duval snuck through enemy lines every night to bring water from the river to the people hiding in the cellars beneath these very buildings." Eliza moved as she spoke, her gray coat billowing slightly in the breeze. She was tall and graceful, with black hair pulled back in a loose knot that somehow looked both casual and elegant. Marcus guessed she was around his age, maybe 29 or 30. There was something magnetic about the way she commanded attention without demanding it. "Catherine was caught on the 7th night," Eliza continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper that forced everyone to lean in closer. "The enemy commander could have executed her. Instead, he was so moved by her courage that he arranged for supply carts to enter the city. He lost his position for that act of mercy. Catherine married him 3 years later, after the war ended." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the group. Marcus found himself smiling, genuinely charmed by both the story and the storyteller. He had spent the last 5 years building his investment firm from a small operation into a multinational powerhouse, and somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy a moment without calculating its value. The tour moved on through the winding streets of the old quarter, past buildings that leaned toward each other like old friends sharing gossip, past narrow alleyways that opened onto hidden courtyards filled with trailing ivy and forgotten statues. Eliza seemed to know every stone, every corner, every faded sign above every doorway. She spoke about the city as though it were a living thing, breathing and changing but never losing its essential character. "This archway," she said, stopping beneath a Gothic curve of stone carved with intricate patterns, was the entrance to the original city library, which burned in 1802. The books were destroyed, but the librarian, a man named Thomas Ashford, had spent 20 years secretly copying the most important manuscripts by hand. He saved over 300 texts that would have been lost forever. Marcus watched her face as she spoke. There was genuine emotion there, a kind of reverence mixed with delight, as if she were rediscovering these stories even as she told them. He had met countless people in his professional life who were good at what they did, competent and efficient, but rarely did he meet anyone who loved their work with this kind of pure, uncomplicated joy. When the tour ended 2 hours later at the steps of the old cathedral, Marcus lingered as the other tourists dispersed, some leaving tips in the jar Eliza set discreetly on the stone wall, others taking photographs of the elaborate facade above them. He approached her as she was folding up a laminated map, preparing for whatever came next in her day. "That was exceptional," he said, and meant it. "How long have you been doing this?" Eliza looked up, surprised. Most tourists thanked her and moved on. Conversations that extended past the tour itself were rare. She studied him for a moment, taking in the expensive watch, the well-tailored coat, the way he stood with the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. But his eyes were kind, curious rather than calculating. 5 years professionally, she replied, tucking the map into her leather satchel. But I have been telling stories about this city my whole life. I grew up here. These streets are as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. It shows, Marcus said. You make history feel alive. Like it matters to right now, not just to the past. She smiled, and he noticed the way it transformed her face, softening the serious set of her mouth. History does matter to right now, she said. Every choice we make is built on 1,000 choices that came before. Every street corner has witnessed love and loss and ordinary miracles. I just try to remind people of that. He wanted to keep talking to her, but a group of teenagers had gathered nearby, clearly waiting for the next tour. Eliza glanced at them and then back at Marcus, an apologetic expression crossing her features. I have another group in 10 minutes, she said. But thank you for the kind words. They mean more than you might think. Marcus nodded, stepping back. I will be in the city for a few more days. Do you give tours every afternoon? Most days, yes. Tomorrow at 2 if the weather holds. Same meeting point at the plaza. He committed it to memory, already knowing he would be there. I will see you then. As he walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed calls, 8 from his chief operating officer, the rest from various department heads and clients. He had told everyone he would be unreachable for the weekend, a rare concession to the exhaustion that had been building for months. His therapist had been blunt during their last session. Burnout was not a matter of if but when, and if Marcus did not learn to step away from work occasionally, his body would make the decision for him. So he had booked a flight to this small European city, a place he had never visited, but that his mother had always talked about with wistful affection. She had studied abroad here during college, before she met his father, before the decades of building the family's pharmaceutical company had consumed her life. Marcus had intended to spend a long weekend wandering museums and cafes, forcing himself to slow down and remember what it felt like to exist without an agenda. He had not expected Eliza. That evening, sitting in his hotel room overlooking the river, Marcus found himself thinking about her stories instead of reviewing the quarterly reports his assistant had sent. He thought about Catherine Duval risking her life to carry water through a war zone, about Thomas Ashford copying manuscripts by candlelight, about the layers of human experience embedded in every building and every stone. The next afternoon, Marcus returned to the plaza at 2 o'clock sharp, and his heart lifted irrationally when he saw Eliza already there, her scarlet umbrella propped against the fountain even though the sun was shining. She was laughing at something an elderly man in the gathering group had said, her head tilted back, completely unself-conscious. When she spotted Marcus, her expression shifted into something between surprise and pleasure. "You came back," she said as he approached. "I warned you I would," he replied. "I hope you have more impossible love stories and improbable heroes." "Always," she said, and the warmth in her voice felt like an invitation. This tour took a different route through the city, focusing on the medieval quarter and the remnants of the old city walls. Eliza told them about sieges and festivals, about the merchant guilds that had once controlled the economy, about the secret tunnels beneath the streets that had been used for everything from smuggling to romance. Marcus asked questions, more than he usually allowed himself to ask about anything outside his area of expertise. He wanted to know how she had learned all of this, whether there were archives she consulted, whether she had a favorite period of history. She answered each question thoughtfully, and he noticed the way she seemed to glow when talking about her research. the hours she spent in the city's historical society library, the interviews she had conducted with older residents who remembered stories passed down through their families. "History is not just what is written in books," she said as they stood in front of a half-timbered building that had once been a baker's shop. "It is what people remember, what they choose to preserve and pass on. My grandmother told me stories her grandmother had told her, and some of those stories go back 200 years. They might not all be perfectly accurate, but they are true in the ways that matter." When the tour ended, Marcus did not leave immediately. He waited again as the group dispersed, and when Eliza finished packing up her materials, he took a chance. "Would you have coffee with me?" he asked. "Or dinner if you have time. I would love to hear more about your work." Eliza hesitated, not because she was not interested, but because she was. There was something about this man that intrigued her, a seriousness tempered by genuine curiosity, a sense that beneath the polished exterior was someone searching for something he could not quite name. But she had learned to be cautious. Tourists came and went, and letting herself become too attached to someone who would inevitably leave was a recipe for heartache. "Coffee," she said finally. "There is a place nearby that makes the best almond pastries in the city." They walked together through the narrow streets, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The cafe Eliza led him to was tucked into a quiet courtyard, a tiny establishment with only 6 tables and a cat sleeping in the window. The owner, a woman with steel-gray hair and a knowing smile, greeted Eliza like family. "My usual, please, Marie," Eliza said, and then glanced at Marcus. "Trust me." "Absolutely," he said, and Marie nodded approvingly before disappearing into the kitchen. They sat at a corner table, and for the first time since meeting her, Marcus saw Eliza as something other than a tour guide. She shed the professional persona the way someone might shrug off a coat, becoming more relaxed, more herself. They talked easily, the conversation flowing from history to travel to the strange beauty of finding connection in unexpected places. "So what brings you to the city?" Eliza asked, breaking off a piece of the pastry Marie had brought them. "You do not seem like the typical tourist." Marcus considered how much to reveal. He was used to people treating him differently once they knew about his wealth and his company, and he found himself wanting to preserve this simple, uncomplicated interaction for as long as possible. "I needed a break," he said, which was true enough. "I work too much, and I was starting to forget why I work at all. A friend suggested I travel somewhere I had never been, somewhere without an itinerary or a plan. So here I am." "And what do you do when you are working too much?" "I run an investment firm. We focus on emerging markets, sustainable development projects, that kind of thing. It is rewarding, but it is also consuming. I have spent the last 5 years building it, and somewhere along the way, I lost the off switch." Eliza nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I think that is common, especially when you love what you do. The challenge is remembering that you are more than your work. You have to feed the other parts of yourself, or you end up hollowed out." "Is that what you do? Feed the other parts of yourself?" she smiled. "I try. I read novels that have nothing to do with history. I paint, badly but enthusiastically. I have a terrible habit of adopting stray cats. I try to remember that life is more than facts and dates and tours. Though I admit, the tours are my favorite part." They talked until the sun dipped below the roofline, and the courtyard filled with the soft blue light of dusk. Marie brought them more coffee, then discreetly flipped the sign on the door to closed but did not ask them to leave. Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, a tightness he had not realized he was carrying. When they finally left the cafe, the city had transformed into its evening self. Lights glowing in windows, the sound of music drifting from a bar down the street. Eliza pulled her coat tighter against the cooling air, and Marcus fell into step beside her. "Thank you for this," he said. "I have spent so much time in boardrooms and hotels that I forgot what it is like to just talk to someone without an agenda." "You are welcome," Eliza said. "Though I should be thanking you. It is not often I get to have a real conversation with someone from a tour. Most people just want directions to the nearest restaurant." They reached the plaza where they had first met, and Eliza paused, clearly about to say goodbye. Marcus did not want the evening to end, but he also did not want to push. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "Not a tour, just as people. Maybe I could cook you dinner. I am staying in a rental apartment with an actual kitchen, and I promise I am reasonably competent." Eliza studied him, weighing the decision. Every instinct told her to be careful, to keep her distance from this man who would leave in a few days and take with him whatever fragile connection they were building. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability that matched her own, and she found herself wanting to take the risk. "I would like that," she said. "Tomorrow at 7. Marcus felt a surge of relief and happiness that seemed disproportionate to the simple acceptance, but he did not question it. "Tomorrow at 7. I will text you the address." They exchanged numbers, and as Eliza walked away, Marcus stood in the plaza watching her go, the scarlet umbrella swinging from her hand, and he knew with absolute certainty that his weekend trip was about to become something more. The next day, Marcus spent an embarrassing amount of time at the local market, selecting ingredients with the kind of care he usually reserved for investment portfolios. He was not an expert cook, but his mother had insisted he learn the basics, and he had always found a meditative quality in the process of preparing food. He chose fresh pasta, vegetables from a farm stand, herbs that smelled like summer, and a bottle of wine the vendor promised was exceptional. Back at the apartment, he cleaned obsessively, moving furniture and lighting candles until the space felt warm and inviting rather than sterile and temporary. He was being ridiculous, he knew, putting this much effort into a simple dinner, but he could not seem to help himself. Eliza had woken something in him, a desire to impress and connect that went beyond his usual careful charm. When she arrived at 7, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers and wearing a dark green dress that made her eyes look almost luminous, Marcus felt his carefully rehearsed casualness evaporate. "You look beautiful," he said, too honest and too immediate, but Eliza only smiled. "You look nervous," she replied, stepping inside. "Should I be worried about the food?" "Probably," he admitted, laughing. "But I promise I have not poisoned anything. Mostly I am nervous because I realized I know nothing about cooking for someone whose entire life is built around understanding layers of history and meaning, and now I am worried everything I make will seem shallow." Eliza set the flowers on the counter and turned to face him fully. "Marcus, I am here because I want to spend time with you, not because I am expecting a performance. If the food is terrible, we will order pizza and laugh about it. Stop overthinking." Her directness steadied him. He poured them each a glass of wine and set about finishing the meal while Eliza explored the apartment, asking questions about his life back home, his family, the path that had led him to investment banking. Marcus found himself telling her things he rarely shared, about his parents' complicated legacy, about the pressure of trying to build something meaningful rather than just profitable, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like a physical weight. Eliza listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions, offering observations that felt like gentle illuminations rather than criticism. Over dinner, which turned out to be surprisingly good, they talked about everything and nothing. Eliza told him about growing up in the city, about her father who had been a professor of literature and her mother who had run a bookstore. Both had died within a year of each other when Eliza was 24, leaving her unmoored and searching for purpose. The tours started as a way to cope, she said, twirling pasta on her fork. I needed to remember why I loved this place, why it mattered. Telling the stories to other people helped me hold onto my own story. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Marcus said. We all need ways to anchor ourselves. After dinner, they moved to the couch, the conversation growing quieter, more intimate. Marcus told her about the pressure of constantly performing success, of being the person everyone expected him to be. Eliza told him about the fear of never doing enough, of watching other people leave the city for bigger opportunities while she stayed rooted in place. You ever think about leaving? Marcus asked. Sometimes, Eliza admitted. But then I walk through the old quarter at dawn, or I find a new story about someone who lived here 300 years ago, and I remember that this place is part of me. I am not sure I know who I would be somewhere else. You would still be you, Marcus said softly. Geography does not change that. Maybe, Eliza said, but we are all shaped by where we come from, by the landscapes that raised us. I think if I left, I would spend the rest of my life feeling like I forgot something important. The evening stretched on, neither of them wanting it to end. At some point, Eliza kicked off her shoes and tucked her feet beneath her, and Marcus found himself sitting closer, their knees almost touching. The conversation became interspersed with comfortable silences, the kind that felt like their own form of communication. When Eliza finally left, well past midnight, Marcus walked her to the door, and there was a moment where they stood facing each other, the air charged with possibility. But neither of them moved to close the distance, both sensing that rushing would somehow diminish what was building between them. Thank you for tonight, Eliza said. I had a wonderful time. So did I, Marcus replied. Can I see you again? Tomorrow, Eliza bit her lip, thinking. I have tours in the afternoon, but I am free in the morning. There is a place I would like to show you if you are willing to wake up early. How early? Sunrise. 5:30. Marcus did not hesitate. I will be ready. Where should I meet you? The plaza. Bring a jacket. It will be cold. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the plaza at 5:20, shivering slightly in the pre-dawn darkness. Eliza was already there, 2 paper cups of coffee in her hands, her scarlet umbrella nowhere in sight. Instead, she wore a thick wool coat and a knitted hat that made her look younger, more vulnerable. You actually came, she said, handing him one of the coffees. I said I would. People say lots of things. They walked through the sleeping city, their footsteps echoing off the stone buildings. Eliza led him away from the tourist areas, through residential streets where lights were just beginning to flicker on in kitchen windows, where the smell of baking bread wafted from unseen bakeries. They climbed a steep hill, following a path that wound between old houses and overgrown gardens, until they reached a small park perched on the edge of the city. This is my favorite place, Eliza said quietly, leading him to a bench that overlooked the valley below. Not many people know about it. It is not on any of the maps. They sat as the sky began to lighten, shades of pink and gold bleeding across the horizon. The city spread out beneath them, a tapestry of rooftops and spires and winding streets, slowly emerging from the darkness. Marcus watched Eliza's face as she watched the sunrise, and he felt something shift inside him, a recognition that this was no longer a pleasant distraction from his real life. This was becoming something that mattered. Why did you bring me here? He asked. Eliza turned to look at him, her expression serious. Because I wanted you to see the city the way I see it. not as a tour guide performing history, but as someone who loves this place despite its flaws because of its flaws. I wanted you to understand why I stay. I think I am starting to, Marcus said. Though I am beginning to suspect it is not just the city I am trying to understand. The honesty hung between them, and Eliza's breath caught slightly. She had been trying to protect herself, to keep this light and temporary, but Marcus was making that impossible. He was kind and genuine and present in a way that felt rare and precious. I leave on Sunday, Marcus said, and the words felt like stones. My flight is booked and I have meetings on Monday that I cannot miss, but I do not want to leave. Then do not, Eliza said, the words escaping before she could stop them. It is not that simple. It never is. They sat in silence as the sun cleared the horizon, bathing everything in clean morning light. Marcus thought about the life waiting for him back home, the obligations and expectations, the carefully constructed empire that required constant attention. He thought about what it would mean to walk away from that, even temporarily, and whether anything he might gain would be worth what he would lose. I can move some meetings, he said finally. Stay through next week, maybe longer. Would that be okay? Would you want me to stay? Eliza looked at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded. Yes, I would want you to stay. Marcus pulled out his phone and began sending emails, rescheduling and delegating with the efficiency of someone who had spent years managing complex operations. His chief operating officer responded within minutes, confused but accepting. Marcus rarely took time off, and when he did, he never extended it. The deviation from pattern was noted but not questioned. As the city woke up around them, Marcus and Eliza remained on the bench, talking about everything they wanted to do with the extra time. Eliza promised to show him the parts of the city tourists never saw, the neighborhoods where real life happened, the spots that held personal meaning. Marcus promised to cook for her again, to let her teach him about the history he had never paid attention to in school. The week that followed was a kind of enchantment, days blurring together in a haze of exploration and conversation. Marcus joined Eliza on her tours, listening to the stories he had already heard but finding new details each time, noticing the way she adapted her presentations to different audiences, the way she made everyone feel seen and included. In the evenings, they cooked together in Marcus's apartment, or Eliza brought him to small restaurants hidden in alleyways, places that served food her grandmother would have made. They talked endlessly, about books and travel and philosophy, about fears and dreams and the strange architecture of their separate lives. Marcus met Eliza's friends, a close-knit group of artists and teachers and small business owners who had known each other since childhood. They welcomed him with curiosity and warmth, teasing Eliza gently about finally bringing someone around. He learned that she was beloved in her community, that people relied on her for more than just historical tours, that she was the kind of person who showed up when you needed help, no questions asked. Eliza met Marcus's world only through his phone, the constant stream of calls and messages that punctuated their time together. She began to understand the scope of what he had built, the complexity of his responsibilities, and she felt both impressed and concerned. This was a man who carried entire companies on his shoulders, whose decisions affected hundreds of employees and their families. How could someone like that ever truly step away? On Thursday evening, they were having dinner at a restaurant near the river when Marcus's phone rang for the 10th time in an hour. He silenced it, apologizing, but Eliza could see the tension building in his shoulders. "You should answer," she said. "It might be important." "It is always important," Marcus replied. "That is the problem. Everything is urgent. Everything requires my immediate attention. If I answer now, the next 2 hours will be phone calls and emails, and I do not want to lose this evening with you. Marcus, I am not going anywhere. Take the call. He hesitated, then nodded and stepped outside. Through the window, Eliza watched him pace as he talked, his expression shifting from patient to frustrated to resigned. When he returned 15 minutes later, he looked exhausted. I have to go back, he said, sitting down heavily. There is a situation with one of our major investments, something that requires my physical presence. My team is good, but this is beyond their authority to handle. Eliza felt her heart sink, but she kept her voice steady. When? Tomorrow, if possible. Saturday at the latest. So we have tonight. We have tonight, he agreed. And Eliza, I am coming back. I do not know exactly when, but I will figure it out. This is not over. She wanted to believe him, but she had heard similar promises before, from friends who moved away swearing to stay in touch, from lovers who meant well but could not sustain long-distance connection. Life had a way of eroding good intentions. They finished dinner quietly, the earlier ease replaced by a melancholy awareness of time running out. Back at Marcus's apartment, they sat close on the couch, Eliza's head on his shoulder, neither of them speaking. The silence felt heavy with everything they had not said, all the feelings that had grown faster and deeper than either had expected. I care about you, Marcus said finally, more than is probably reasonable after a week, but there it is. I care about you too, Eliza replied. Which is why this hurts. He turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. It does not have to hurt. We can make this work. People do long-distance relationships all the time. People with normal jobs, maybe. Marcus, your life is oceans and time zones away from mine. You run a company that needs you constantly. I am rooted here in this city. How do we bridge that gap? I do not know yet, he admitted, but I want to try. Do not you? Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against her skin. She thought about the week they had shared, the way he made her laugh, the way he listened like her words were the most important thing in the world, the way he looked at her like she was extraordinary. She thought about going back to her regular life, her tours and her friends and her quiet apartment, and the emptiness that would follow now that she knew what it felt like to be with him. Yes, she whispered. I want to try. Marcus kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious he might accidentally break. Eliza kissed him back, letting herself fall into the moment, into the connection that had been building since that first rainy afternoon in the plaza. Time seemed to suspend, the world narrowing to just the two of them, this small, warm space they had created together. They spent the night talking and kissing and holding each other, neither wanting to sleep and lose precious hours. Marcus told her about his childhood, about the parents who loved him but never quite saw him, about the loneliness of building something everyone admired but nobody understood. Eliza told him about losing her parents, about the grief that still ambushed her at unexpected moments, about the fear of loving someone and losing them. You will not lose me, Marcus promised, and even though neither of them could know if that was true, Eliza chose to believe him. At dawn, they walked together through the empty streets to the plaza where they had met. Marcus's flight left at noon, and he needed to pack and check out of the apartment. They stood facing each other in the gray morning light, and Eliza felt tears threatening. Do not cry, Marcus said gently. This is not goodbye. I will call you tonight and tomorrow and every day until I can come back. Promise. I promise. Eliza, you have changed something in me. I came here burnt out and disconnected, and you reminded me what it feels like to be alive, to care about something beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. I am not letting that go. He kissed her once more, long and deep. And then he was walking away, disappearing around a corner, leaving Eliza standing alone with her scarlet umbrella, and a heart that felt too full and too empty at the same time. The next few weeks were a study in discipline and devotion. Marcus called every day, sometimes twice, their conversations stretching late into the night across the time difference. He told her about the crisis he was managing, the long hours at the office, the exhaustion that had returned with a vengeance now that he was back in his regular life. Eliza told him about her tours, about the new stories she was researching, about the way the city felt different now, colored by his absence. They sent each other photos and voice messages and long, rambling emails about nothing and everything. Marcus sent her books he thought she would love, first editions of historical texts he found in specialty shops. Eliza sent him packets of the coffee they had drunk together, recipe cards from Marie's cafe, small artifacts that carried the smell and feel of the city. But as the weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks, the strain began to show. Marcus's return kept getting delayed by one crisis after another. A merger fell through and had to be renegotiated. A key investor threatened to pull out. The board demanded his presence at a series of international meetings. Each delay was legitimate, each explanation reasonable, but Eliza could feel him slipping away, pulled back into the gravity of his other life. "I miss you," she said one night, her voice small over the phone. "I miss you too," Marcus replied, and she could hear the exhaustion in his tone. "I am trying, Eliza. I am doing everything I can to clear my schedule, but everything keeps falling apart." "Maybe this is the universe telling us something," Eliza said. "Maybe we are trying to force something that is not meant to work." "Do not say that." His voice was sharp with fear. "Do not give up on us." "I am not giving up. I am being realistic. Marcus, you have not been here in 2 months. You barely sleep because you are trying to balance your work with calling me. This is not sustainable." I know. Just give me a little more time. I am working on something, a way to restructure the company so I have more flexibility, but these things take time." Eliza wanted to believe him, but doubt was creeping in, cold and insidious. She thought about the women she knew who had waited for men to change, to prioritize them, to somehow transform into people who could show up consistently. It almost never worked. People were who they were, and loving them did not change the fundamental incompatibilities. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake letting herself fall for someone whose life was so dramatically different from her own. The practical part of her brain insisted she should end it now, before she was in any deeper, before the inevitable breakup destroyed her completely. But her heart argued back, reminding her of the way Marcus looked at her, the way he made her feel seen and valued, the way he had woken parts of herself she had thought were dormant. The next morning, exhausted and emotionally raw, Eliza led a tour through the old quarter. She told the stories automatically, her body going through the motions while her mind was elsewhere. Halfway through, she faltered, forgetting the details of an anecdote she had told 100 times. The group waited patiently while she gathered herself, but afterwards, Eliza felt shaken. This work was her anchor, her purpose, and she could not let it suffer because of a relationship that might not even survive another month. That evening, when Marcus called, she was honest. "This is affecting my work," she said. "I am distracted and sad and I cannot focus. I love talking to you, but maybe we need to take a step back, give ourselves some space to think." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus said quietly, "Is that what you want? Space?" "I do not know what I want. I want you here, but you cannot be here." "I want to be okay with that, but I am not. What if I came next week? Would that help?" Eliza felt a flicker of hope, immediately followed by skepticism. Can you actually do that, or is this another promise you will have to break? Eliza, I have never broken a promise to you. No, you have just postponed them indefinitely. The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. Marcus took a breath, and when he spoke again, his tone was different, sharper with determination. You are right. I have been letting work consume me again, letting other people's crises become more important than what we are building. That ends now. I am booking a flight tonight and I am coming to you next week. Whatever fires need putting out, my team can handle them or they can wait. You are my priority. Marcus, I do not want you to resent me for pulling you away from your work. You are not pulling me away, I am choosing you. There is a difference. Something in his voice convinced her, a certainty that had been missing in their previous conversations. Okay, she said. Next week. I will believe it when I see you. You will see me, he promised. And Eliza, we are going to figure this out. I do not know exactly how yet, but I am not losing you. True to his word, Marcus arrived the following Thursday, stepping off the plane exhausted and rumpled but smiling. Eliza met him at the airport, and when she saw him walking through the arrival's gate, all her doubts dissolved. She ran to him and he caught her, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her hair. You came, she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I came, he confirmed. And I have 2 weeks completely clear. No meetings, no emergencies. Just you and me. They spent the first few days relearning each other, rediscovering the ease they had found before distance complicated everything. Marcus joined her tours again, and Eliza showed him the new stories she had discovered, the research she had been doing into the city's medieval guild system. They cooked together, walked for hours through the winding streets, stayed up late talking about everything they had been holding back over the phone. On the 4th day, Marcus asked her to come with him somewhere. He had rented a car, which confused Eliza since everything worth seeing was in the city itself. But she trusted him, and they drove for an hour into the countryside, following narrow roads through rolling hills and small villages. They stopped at a stone cottage perched on a hillside overlooking a valley. It was old and charming, with a wild garden and views that stretched for miles. A real estate agent was waiting, and as they toured the property, Eliza realized what Marcus was suggesting. I want to buy this, he said, standing in the main room with its exposed beams and fireplace. I want a place here, a base where I can come and work remotely when I need to be near you. It is only an hour from the city, close enough that we can see each other regularly but far enough that I can focus when I need to. Eliza stared at him, overwhelmed. Marcus, this is insane. You cannot buy a house in a foreign country because of a relationship that is 2 months old. Why not? I have bought companies on less evidence than what we have. Eliza, I love you. I have probably loved you since you told me about Catherine Duval and her water buckets. I do not want to do long distance anymore. I want to build a life that includes you, and this is how I can do that. You love me. Desperately, completely. In a way that frankly terrifies me because I have never felt like this about anyone. Eliza felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. I love you too. But Marcus, buying a house is a huge commitment. What if this does not work out? What if you hate being here? What if the distance and the complications break us apart anyway? Then I will have a beautiful house in the countryside and some of the best memories of my life. But I do not think that is going to happen. I think we are going to figure this out, and a few years from now, we will be laughing about how scared we were. He took her hands, his expression serious and tender. Move in with me. Not permanently, not right away, but spend time here with me. Let us see if we can make this work in real life, not just over the phone. If it does not feel right, we will adjust. But I need to try. We need to try. Eliza looked around the cottage, imagining mornings in the garden, evenings by the fireplace, Marcus working at the desk in the corner while she researched her tours. It was not the life she had planned, but it felt possible, more possible than anything had felt in months. "Yes," she said. "Let us try." The cottage became theirs within 3 weeks, a whirlwind of paperwork and negotiations that Marcus handled with the efficiency of someone used to closing complex deals. He had it furnished simply but comfortably, with enough space for both of them to work without being on top of each other. He set up a home office with all the technology he needed to run his company remotely, and Eliza claimed a sunny corner room for her historical research and tour planning. The transition was not seamless. Marcus struggled with the slower pace of life, the lack of immediate access to his team, the frustration of video meetings when he was used to in-person negotiations. Eliza struggled with sharing her space, with adjusting her routines, with the fear that Marcus would wake up one day and realize he had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, day by day, they built something that worked. Marcus discovered he could be more effective working remotely than he had imagined, that forcing himself to delegate and trust his team actually made the company stronger. He flew back for crucial meetings, but spent most of his time at the cottage, splitting his days between business calls and exploring the countryside with Eliza. Eliza continued her tours, but she also began writing a book, a collection of the city's hidden histories that Marcus encouraged her to pursue. She had always thought of writing as something she would do eventually someday, but Marcus pushed her to start now, offering feedback and support, believing in her ability more than she believed in herself. They had their share of arguments, usually about the same underlying tension: Marcus's tendency to let work expand to fill all available time, Eliza's fear of being abandoned when something more important came along. But they learned to fight fair, to talk through problems rather than letting resentment build, to prioritize their relationship even when it was difficult. 6 months after Marcus bought the cottage, he took Eliza back to the plaza where they had met. It was late afternoon, the same time of day as that first rainy tour, though the weather was clear and warm now. They stood by the fountain, and Marcus looked nervous in a way Eliza had never seen before. "I have a story to tell you," he said. "It is about a man who was lost, who had forgotten what it meant to be happy, who was going through the motions of a successful life without understanding why any of it mattered. And then he met a woman with a scarlet umbrella who told him about Catherine Duval and water buckets and courage, and everything changed." Eliza felt her heart start to pound, recognizing the shape of what was coming but needing to hear it anyway. This woman taught him that history is not just dates and facts, but stories about people who loved and struggled and chose to be brave. She taught him that a meaningful life is not measured in profit margins, but in connections and moments and the small, everyday choice to show up for the people you love. She taught him that home is not a place but a person. Marcus knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Eliza Moreau, you have changed my entire world. Will you marry me?" Eliza was crying and laughing simultaneously, nodding before she could even form words. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, a simple band with a single perfect diamond, and when he stood, she threw her arms around him, kissing him with all the joy and relief and overwhelming love she felt. The handful of tourists in the plaza applauded, and Eliza realized, absurdly, that she was part of someone else's story now. A romantic moment they would remember and probably embellish when they told their friends about their trip. They were married 4 months later in a small ceremony in the cathedral, surrounded by Eliza's close friends and Marcus's family, who flew in for the occasion. Marcus's mother cried through the entire ceremony, telling Eliza afterwards that she had never seen her son so happy, so genuinely at peace. Eliza's old professor from university gave a toast about love being the greatest story ever told, the one that never got old no matter how many times you heard it. The next year was a study in compromise and creativity. Marcus restructured his company significantly, promoting trusted executives into leadership roles, and taking on more of an advisory position that allowed him to work remotely most of the time. It required letting go of control in ways that terrified him, but the result was a healthier, more sustainable life. The company did not collapse without his constant presence. In fact, it thrived, becoming more innovative and responsive without the bottleneck of his micromanagement. Eliza's book was published to modest but genuine acclaim, a beautiful volume filled with the stories she had been telling for years, now preserved for anyone to read. She continued her tours, but less frequently, spending more time on research and writing. She and Marcus established a rhythm that worked for them: mornings for individual work, afternoons for shared exploration, evenings for cooking together and talking about their days. They divided their time between the cottage and a small apartment they rented in the city, close enough to the old quarter that Eliza could walk to her favorite spots. Marcus learned to love both spaces, the quiet of the countryside and the vibrant energy of the city streets. He learned the stories Eliza told on her tours, could recite the tale of Catherine Duval from memory, often added details she had forgotten. 2 years after their wedding, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror, the realization that they were about to embark on a completely different kind of adventure. Marcus became absurdly protective, worrying about everything from the cottage's distance from the hospital to whether they had enough books on parenting. Eliza found his anxiety endearing and annoying in equal measure, but underneath it, she saw the depth of his love and commitment. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, tiny and perfect and screaming with impressive volume. They named her Catherine, after the woman who had carried water through a war zone, and from the moment Marcus held her, Eliza knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The years that followed were full and complex, the beautiful mess of building a life together. Marcus continued to work, but his identity was no longer wrapped up entirely in his company. He was a husband, a father, a man who knew the history of every street corner in the old quarter and could tell his daughter stories that made her eyes go wide with wonder. Eliza continued to lead tours, to write, to preserve the histories that mattered, but she also learned to let go of her fear of losing the people she loved, to trust that some connections were strong enough to withstand time and change. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood together in the plaza, Catherine asleep in Marcus's arms, and watched as a new tour guide led a group through the square. She was young and enthusiastic, telling the story of Catherine Duval with passion and flair. Marcus and Eliza listened, smiling at each other, remembering that rainy afternoon when everything had changed. "Did you ever imagine this?" Marcus asked quietly. "When you saw me join that first tour?" "No," Eliza admitted. "I thought you were just another tourist, someone who would pass through and be forgotten by the next day. I never imagined you would become my whole world." "Funny how that works," Marcus said. "I thought I was just taking a break from work, escaping for a weekend. Instead, I found home." They walked through the city as the sun set, past the fountain and the archway and the cathedral where they had been married, past the hidden courtyard where Marie's cafe still served the best almond pastries in the city, past all the places that held their history now, added to the centuries of stories that came before. Catherine woke up and demanded to walk, toddling between them with fierce determination, and Marcus and Eliza each took one of her small hands, guiding her over the ancient cobblestones. The city lights began to glow against the deepening blue of the evening sky, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. Eliza thought about all the people who had walked these streets before them, the lovers and fighters and ordinary citizens who had built this place stone by stone, story by story. She thought about the histories she had spent her life preserving, and the new history she was creating with Marcus and Catherine. "Tell me a story," Catherine demanded, as she always did at bedtime. "Tell me about the Water Lady." And so Eliza began, her voice carrying through the twilight, telling the tale of Catherine Duval and the enemy commander who chose mercy, of a love that grew out of courage and conflict, and the simple human impulse toward kindness. Marcus listened, even though he had heard the story 100 times, and marveled at how Eliza could make it feel new with each telling, how she could find meaning in the old tales and apply them to the life they were living right now. When the story ended, Catherine clapped and demanded another, but Eliza shook her head, laughing. "Tomorrow, little one. There are always more stories tomorrow." They made their way back to the apartment, Marcus carrying a now drowsy Catherine, Eliza's hand warm in his free one. Inside, they went through the familiar rituals of bedtime, reading more stories, singing lullabies, finally turning out the lights and retreating to their own room. Later, lying in bed with Marcus's arms around her, Eliza felt the profound contentment of a life fully lived. She had not known, that rainy afternoon 5 years ago, that the serious man with the expensive watch would become her husband, her partner, the person who made her laugh and challenged her thinking, and showed up day after day with unwavering devotion. She had not known that her small, rooted life would expand to include a cottage in the hills, a published book, a daughter named after a historical hero. She had not known that love could be this steady, this deep, this much like coming home. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus murmured, half asleep. "How lucky I am," Eliza replied. "How impossibly, ridiculously lucky." "Me too," he said, pulling her closer. "Every single day." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, while outside the city continued its ancient rhythm, carrying their story forward into whatever came next. The plaza where they met would see countless more tours, more tourists, more moments of connection and discovery. The fountain would keep flowing, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and kindness could change everything. And somewhere in the future, perhaps Catherine would stand in that plaza and tell her own daughter about the grandmother she never met, about the historian who preserved stories and the businessman who learned to slow down, about the love that grew from a rainy afternoon and a voice that made history feel alive. The story would become part of the city's living memory, another layer in the endless accumulation of human experience. But that was years away. For now, there was just this: a family sleeping peacefully in the city that had brought them together, the night settling softly over ancient streets, and the quiet promise of morning, of another day to love and build and add their small verse to the great ongoing poem of life. The seasons turned, and Marcus found himself falling more deeply in love with both the city and the woman who had shown it to him. He learned to navigate the narrow streets without a map, discovered which bakery had the best bread on Sunday mornings, became a regular at the Historical Society, where Eliza did her research. The elderly librarians there began to recognize him, would save interesting documents they thought might help with Eliza's next book. His company continued to evolve, growing in new directions under the leadership of the team he had learned to trust. Marcus remained involved, of course, but the desperate urgency that had once defined his work life had mellowed into something more sustainable. He took pride in what he had built, but it no longer consumed him. There was space now for other things, for the life he was living rather than the life he was building toward some distant future. Eliza's second book was in progress, a deeper dive into the women's histories of the city, the stories that had been overlooked or minimized in traditional accounts. Marcus often served as her first reader, offering feedback that was both supportive and genuinely useful. He had developed an ear for narrative over their years together, could tell when a story was not quite landing or needed more context. Catherine grew into a curious, fearless child who demanded stories constantly and had opinions about everything. She loved the cottage with its wild garden and the trails through the countryside, but she also loved the city, could find her way through the old quarter with impressive confidence for a 5-year-old. She had inherited her mother's gift for storytelling and her father's analytical mind, a combination that promised interesting things for her future. On a winter evening, with snow falling softly outside and the fireplace crackling, Marcus watched Eliza help Catherine with a drawing of the plaza fountain. They were working together on Catherine's project for school, creating a family history that included places as well as people. Eliza was explaining about the fountain's construction, about the centuries of history it had witnessed, and Catherine was adding her own imaginative flourishes to the drawing, people and animals and details that had never existed, but somehow felt true. Marcus felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. He thought about the man he had been 5 years ago, successful but hollow, racing through life without understanding where he was going or why. That man would not have recognized the person he had become, would have been baffled by the choices Marcus had made, the priorities he had rearranged. But that man had also been brave enough to join a tour group on a rainy afternoon, curious enough to stay for a second tour, open enough to let himself fall in love. Maybe he had not been as lost as he felt. Maybe he had just been waiting for the right person to show him the way home. "Papa, come help," Catherine called, waving him over. "Mama says you know about the people who built the fountain." Marcus joined them on the floor, contributing what he remembered from Eliza's stories, marveling at how completely his life had transformed. This was what mattered, he thought. Not the deals or the profit margins or the accolades, but these small, ordinary moments, the warmth of his family around him, the snow falling outside their window, the sound of his daughter's laughter. Later, after Catherine was asleep and they had cleaned up the art supplies scattered across the floor, Marcus and Eliza sat together on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For that first tour. For giving me coffee at dawn. For taking a chance on someone who did not know how to slow down. For building this life with me." Eliza lifted her head to look at him. "You know I should be thanking you, right? You changed everything for me too. I was so stuck, so afraid of anything that might pull me away from what I knew. You showed me that love does not have to mean losing yourself. It can mean becoming more yourself than you ever were alone." They kissed, soft and familiar, the kind of kiss that held years of intimacy and understanding. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in quiet white. Inside, the fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in this small, warm space, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight to what they had built together. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and changes. There would be difficult times, moments of doubt, the inevitable friction of two strong personalities building a shared life. But they would face it all together, anchored by the love that had begun with stories about water buckets and courage, with a scarlet umbrella and a plaza fountain, with a woman who made history feel alive, and a man who learned to live in the present rather than always racing toward the future. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Marcus would ask Eliza to tell him about Catherine Duval again, even though he knew the story by heart. He would listen as she spoke, her voice carrying the same passion it had that first rainy afternoon, and he would marvel at the strange and beautiful way life could surprise you, could give you exactly what you needed at the moment you stopped desperately searching for it. They grew old together in that city of stories, adding their own tale to the accumulated history of the place. They watched Catherine grow up and find her own path, saw the city change while remaining essentially itself, continued to discover new layers and meanings in the streets they walked together. And until the very end, Marcus never forgot the woman with the scarlet umbrella who had taught him that the best stories were not just in history books but in the living, breathing present, in the choice to show up and be present and love with your whole heart. That was their story. And like all the best stories, it was both extraordinary and completely ordinary, epic and intimate, a grand romance that played out in the small moments of daily life. It was a story about choosing love, about courage and compromise, and the beautiful complexity of building a life with another person. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth preserving for whatever came next. And somewhere, perhaps, a tour guide would one day tell it to a group of tourists in a plaza, pointing to the fountain where two people had met and fallen in love, where a millionaire had learned that wealth was not measured in money, but in moments, where a historian had discovered that the best history was the one you created yourself. The story would continue, rippling outward through time, another thread in the endless tapestry of human connection. But that was for the future. For now, there was just this: Marcus and Eliza, together in the city they loved, their story still being written, their love still growing, still discovering new depths and dimensions with each passing day. And that was enough. That was everything.